Welcome to I Change the Narrative, a podcast for and about Black men, inspiring, supporting, and empowering Black men and Black boys. Today's topic is PTSD and anxiety, and when it rears its ugly head in our Black neighborhoods. Before we start the conversation, I want to ask our guests to briefly tell us about yourself and the work that you're involved in that lends itself to the topic or the lived experience, starting with James.
What's going on, good people? I'm James Harris. I'm located in Richmond, Virginia. I'm a father, veteran, entrepreneur, and also founded a movement called Men to Heal, which focuses on men's overall wellness, their mental health, as well as their physical health. And I'm also the author of a book called Man, Just Express Yourself, which is an interactive planner guide for boys and men to better express themselves. Not only dealing with trauma, but unresolved grief, emotions, and a lot of taboo topics that men often don't like to discuss.
Thank you. Thank you. Sean.
All right. Hey, everybody. My name is Sean Devitil. I'm from Brooklyn, New York, and I work for Neighbors in Action. It's in Brooklyn, New York, and home of our anti-gun violence project, Save Our Streets. So, and I'm the clinical services manager. So I spearhead our therapeutic services and our clinical work. Our Make It Happen program, we work with young men of color who've been impacted by violence. And, you know, we understand that someone can be impacted in many ways by violence as well, though. So we do a lot of work around helping young men explore what masculinity means to them and how it is it's interconnected with trauma and violence as well, though, too. And I just want to thank you for allowing me to be here with y'all today.
Thank you. William, introduce yourself and the work that you do. William. William, can you hear me? William. Okay, so we're going to get started with the conversation. And I first wanted to address the many people think of PTSD as something that you only get when you have been in the military or involved in a traumatic incident. So the truth is that it's so much more than that. More and more people are becoming aware, more aware of the truth that a non-combat form of PTSD can develop based on experiences in your everyday environment. So I wanted to ask you all about what is PTSD, first of all, because there are some people that do not know what PTSD is. Anyone can go.
All right. So, I mean, I think a lot of people are confused or just has the notion, again, of what trauma is or isn't. So trauma is a response that's deeply like distressing to your and disturbing to your, you know, it'll overwhelm your ability to cope, cause you to have feelings of helplessness, and it can diminish your like ability to identify like a wide range of emotions within yourself. And a lot of people don't know that trauma can be something that you witness, not necessarily something that impact you directly. So you can observe an accident or violence or yes, be in war or be a victim of violence and stuff like that and have PTSD. But in many cases, before you even get to PTSD, you can develop acute stress disorder. So acute stress disorder is anything from 1 day up to a month. You'll have those symptoms, but PTSD is post-traumatic stress disorder. So anything beyond a month It can be a month and a day, it can be 6 months, it can be a year, it can be 20 years. That you have a regression and think about that traumatic event that you experienced, and then just start to have symptoms. And a lot of people don't know it's emotional symptoms as well as physical symptoms when you are dealing with trauma. So some of the emotional signs and symptoms of trauma is, of course, the anger, the sadness, the fear, the shame, and stuff like that. But those things can then lead to nightmares, insomnia, difficulty in relationships, emotional outbursts. A lot of people don't coordinate those things with trauma, but it definitely is. And also trauma can have those physical symptoms like I talked about. For a long time, people thought the mind and body was separate, but we know now that they are two, and we should address them as two. So some of those physical symptoms of trauma is, of course, you can be nauseous, you can be dizzy, troubles having sleep difficulty, change in appetite, headaches, gastrointestinal issues. Those things are definitely have impacts from trauma. I don't want to monopolize the conversation, so I'll let somebody else jump in.
That's okay.
Yeah, but he's doing a great job, man. But yeah, just adding to that though too, in regards to like trauma, just that being it could even be in a constant state of like fear, and we always talk about like the impact of trauma and how that physically, it impacts the physical nature of the brain as well though too. And, we talk about like the prefrontal cortex, that thinking part of the brain, the amygdala, that survival part of the brain though too. So I'm like, I think about especially like the young men that I work with. If you're living in a community where there's a lot of violence, there's a lot of things that's going on, and your amygdala is constantly going on and on and off, on and off. That whole sense of being fear and what is normal is totally like screwed. Like so just that constant state of fear, and then that everlasting effect that can have on a person because of trauma. So yeah.
Wow, you've all said so much already. So how do I know that you all work with young men, young boys. How do you get these gentlemen to identify that it is some form of anxiety, some form of PTSD that they've experienced, so that they can try to get help? I've taught inner city high schoolers, and some of my students used to come to school late, because someone just got killed and it was nothing to them. And I would ask them, different questions, because it was a lifestyle that I was not used to. Walking, stepping over a dead body, watching someone get stabbed. How do you address those young men that have dealt with that kind of trauma?
So for me, I see a wide range of clientele. So I do private practice as well as community-based services. But within session, the first thing I start with is education, because a lot of people don't know that they are dealing with unresolved grief or unresolved trauma or any other diagnoses. So you got to enlighten them on what's actually taking place. And a lot of displacement, can happen as well. But for the most part, when those things happen, oftentimes people, like, let's take the young man, for example, that you're talking about, like they become numb and desensitized to it because they always see it, so for them it's normal. That's why it doesn't appear to affect them, but it does affect them, and not only affect them personally, but it can affect the people vicariously around them. So those, like I mentioned, the anger outbursts, the lack of emotional connection and stuff like that, those things are symptoms of not dealing with the problem because you don't think you have a problem in some cases.
Yeah, and just adding to that as well, like in my work, and just working with the young men that I work with, it's like, yeah, helping them understand though as well though too, like trauma is a real thing though, and it's not it's not is you're not weak because of that, because you experience something or you're dealing with something. And it is easy to just normalize it, like, well, this happens every day, and it is what it is. But at the same time, these things still have an effect on you, your community, those around you, like, people you love. And, you might not understand it in that perspective as well, though. And I just look at it as something that, it takes time as well, though, too. And helping them acknowledge, like, yeah, I did experience this, this did have an impact on me. But one, I didn't even know how to talk about it. And that's the thing as well, though, too, because a lot of times they're not in spaces where, they're able to talk about it. It's more about, how do I just keep myself safe, essentially. And that's where, that's what I've seen in this work that I've been doing.
Is PTSD something that we can self-diagnose?
I would, in regards to that, I would say, like, is in my opinion, I feel like it's kind of easy sometimes to say, PTSD, right? And we think about, like we just said, we compare it to like the military armed forces and stuff like that.
Right.
But like, even if we thought about PTSD as present or present trauma instead of that post trauma, because we think about complex trauma, we think about the systems, the people, like where they're living at. That's something that they have to deal with every single day. Like, I remember I was just having a conversation about like survivorship and like victims, because a lot of times I work with folks that have been survivors and victims of violence, though. But when you're living in these communities where you're dealing with poverty, violence, a lot of the systems, you're constantly dealing with these things. So I'm like, you've always been a victim. You've always been a survivor as well, though, too. You're dealing with constant stressors and trauma on a day-to-day basis. So do we automatically, diagnose someone then saying that, they're dealing with PTSD if there's something that essentially a lot of young men, Black and brown young men, are born into? So that's the thing that I always like kind of have to challenge myself in regards to that, though.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, I mean, to add to that, though, we got to understand that to piggyback off what he just said, again, people become numb and desensitized to it because this is what they grow up into. But actual diagnoses of PTSD, it take more than those symptoms that meet the eye. It's specific criteria that one has to meet, and it's specifically for a period of time as well. That's why I highlighted the difference between acute stress disorder. He just mentioned complex trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder, some that's developed after a series of different events and things like that. And also, it's when you're talking about trauma, I think people automatically go to PTSD because that's probably something they heard in the news or something they heard in the media, or they got that correlation to the military and stuff like that. But trauma itself is a wide, diverse sector. A lot of people don't even know that within trauma is big T's and little T's. And some of those little T's, you got the distress from relationships, you got infidelity, you can have conflicts at work, you can have financial trouble, you can have legal battles going back to court. Those things can be considered like little T's. But when we talk about like complex trauma and like trauma that everybody can potentially relate to, we start thinking catastrophic events like terrorism, mass shootings, and the weather stuff, with the hurricanes and all those things. Those things people are closely associated with trauma because they know it impacted like a mass full of people. But when you're talking about like the shootings, like directly that impact us as African-American men, because that could have been me, you know what I'm saying? Like, how am I gonna go on? I fit the criteria. This guy was doing nothing, and so those things started happening. And then being agitated, always anxious, looking over your shoulder and stuff like that, you start to then correlate those things to war. I mean, I'm a veteran. I went to Iraq and Afghanistan. And, those same symptoms that I experienced there is what I experience here when I'm at the light or when I see a police officer on the other side of the road. That immediate, oh, man, is he going to get behind me? I'm clean, but, what's about to happen?
Right.
And those things shouldn't be occurring. We begin to have those, your hair stick up on your arm and stuff like that. You get easily agitated and frustrated just the thought of, dang, I might be a victim. Like, let me make sure everything's good. Although for sure that you haven't done anything. So those things can be related to trauma as well. And I think that's what people get the correlation from and automatically think PTSD, but it is complex trauma, acute stress disorder, and overall trauma.
Mm-hmm. And can I just add to that thing as well, though, too? And I appreciate you saying that, James. Like, I even thinking about like a lot of these young men that we come across, they have that, I don't want to say that militarized mindset in a way as well, though, too. Like you hear folks saying like, I'm on demon time, I'm on this, I'm that. I'm like, I'm ready just in case anything happens, though. And you think about that, like, like, what makes a 16, 17, 18-year-old young man has that mindset already? Like, I'm whatever happens, or I always got to watch my back, though, because it's like, yeah, it's a product of the environment that we're living in that they feel like they have to be like that in a way, though, as well, though, too, because of all that they have experienced, though, as well. Yeah.
So what are some of the identifiers of PTSD? I know, James, you spoke about a little, you named some, but can you go more into detail? Because I want to, for the purpose of this conversation, for those that are listening, they may not know that they have experienced some form of PTSD.
Yeah, you can go ahead, Sean, if you want to, or I can pick it up. It's up to you, boss.
It's all right, James. You can go ahead.
Yeah, all right. So, are you speaking symptoms, or are you talking about event-wise? Because everybody have different resiliency levels. So, what affects me traumatically might not even affect you immediately from a traumatic standpoint. Like, we both can be in a car accident or observe a shooting, and I have lingering effects or you have lingering effects, but that doesn't mean that you weren't affected, if that makes sense. So, are you speaking from that standpoint?
I'm speaking from symptom wise, as well as I would like for you, since you brought it up, to address the many situations as to what can bring on this PTSD.
Okay, so again, some of the emotional symptoms, sadness, anger, denial, fear, shame, some of things like that. And when you're talking about like actual symptoms that people might occur, you get the nightmares, waking up in cold sweats, insomnia. People probably don't want to go to sleep or have difficulty falling asleep. Again, difficulty in relationships because you don't know how to relay what's actually taking place. You don't know how to articulate your feelings in that sense. Emotional lack of maturity can be a sign of it. And some of the physical symptoms is, of course, nausea, dizziness, change in appetite, the gastrointestinal issues, headaches,
Right.
Sexual dysfunction. A lot of people don't correlate those things, but those things are actually a part of it. But PTSD, depression, anxiety, dissociative symptoms, some people even develop a substance use habit to cope with those traumatic situations. But what I spoke of, like if we both are in a car and it wrecked, or we observe a shooting, or we both at war together, and one of us are not immediately impacted in the same way that somebody else is, that doesn't mean that one has PTSD and one doesn't. That just means, we as people have different resiliency levels. And it doesn't mean that this person is not going to be affected later on in life. Some people get the immediate effects of it, and some people have those lingering effects of it, or just small effects over a time period. So I think a lot of people feel like, oh, you was there, you don't care because you're not showing it. But we don't know what that person is doing in private. We don't know how that person is actually affected. So those things are different within the discussion of trauma. And a lot of people like just deal with it that way by feeling they don't have to deal with it, or they try to mask it by a substance or reckless behavior and stuff like that. So those things are important to be able to identify.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if I could add to that, I would. I think you did mention like just anger, and also as well though too, it's just like when you even think about when these events or situations occurred as well, though, too, because you want to, like, if you think about like childhood trauma, like, child abuse and stuff like that, compared to like, as an adult and you dealt with something traumatic as well, though, too. And you just think about like levels of stress and how, especially as a kid, for instance, then how they, let's say if they have support and they were able to, essentially bounce back. And we talk about that resilience as well. Like I always say, when I'm working with anybody that I eventually work with, I always say that a lot of the folks that work already have some built-in resilience. I feel like it as well. And it's just it's me to help them acknowledge that and recognize that and strengthen that as well, though, too, because they've gone through so much already before they got to me. That's why I look at it as well, though, too. So I would definitely just add to that, though, as well, that I can say that, depending on when the situation occurred, I think that plays a great role in it as well, though, too, when we really think about, PTSD.
Wow.
And that support system plays a major factor as well, because a lot of people, linger in those stages of trauma and it starts to go to depression or another diagnoses and stuff like that, because they don't have people that they feel they can turn to or support system who understand. I know for a lot of veterans, that's how it is. Like, I'm not going to therapy. I much rather talk to, the people who was with me, my battle buddies and stuff like that. So it can happen, but you definitely have to have some type of release. Now, whether that's getting out information to somebody that you feel that you connect to, whether that's journaling, whether that's finding something positive to do, it's many things, but a lot of people just bottle it in thinking that nobody's able to understand them. So that's when the issues occur.
Right.
Definitely that bottling in, because you already know when you bottling in and you explode, then that's a wrap as well, though, too. And similar to like you just said, a lot of times when young boys and young men, when they deal with these experiences or these traumatic experiences, like you just said, a lot of times they go to their peers. They go to people who they usually go to people first who have dealt with the same thing as well, though, too. And a lot of times, those same individuals, they haven't properly been able to really process those situations as well. So if you have two individuals that both kind of dealt with similar experiences and have not been able to really process and really like grow from those experiences, then and actually get the help that they really need, like what's the result of that? Then it's just two individuals then continue going on life, having dealt with these situations and not getting the help really that they needed.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Does the code of the streets play a role in all of this for our Black boys?
I can do that one. I think in regards to that, yeah, it plays a big role in my opinion, because a lot of times when working with the guys, a lot of times you hear they say like, it's just certain things you have to do, certain things you can't do as well, though, too. And because of that, yeah, that's a reason why a lot of the young men act that way. They have to be defensive. They have to not show their emotions, because we've been programmed to believe that, showing your emotions, talking about things is a sign of weakness. And I've been in many situations where I'm working with young men that I'm working with, and they've been able to acknowledge that, like, yeah, I gotta be like this, because if I'm outside and I say I don't feel this way or I feel that way, then they're gonna be like, they looking at me weird and stuff like that, and or for better choice, that they're acting feminine. Right. If anything, acting feminine as well, though, too. So when we talk about that trauma and we talk about that interconnection of manhood as well, though, too, that is what makes them a man. All right, being able to, and we talk about like anger. Yeah, that's the only emotion that's really allowed to show that, and anger can manifest in many ways, as we know as well, though. So yeah, it's definitely like a code of the street, essentially, though.
So it's weird. I don't even think it's a code of the streets. I just think it's a code that society has given to boys and men. because you know it doesn't necessarily come from the streets. It's people in the office. It's men in the office that feel this way. It's men at home that feel this way. It's men all over the world that feel this way. You know, I had the opportunity to speak all over the world, 5 different countries, and they deal with the same thing. Whether it's the machismo effect, you know, correlating to the ego, just the simple fact of a lot of men in various places are under pressure because society has equated vulnerability to weakness. So something I often say on my platforms is, you know, feel your feelings. So they can express the fact that they have more than just those negative feelings. Happiness, joy, appreciation, you know, glorify people, compliment others. You know, those things are deemed unworthy of masculinity in some cases, you know, like, oh, bro, that's dope, you know, and now, you know, people looking at you like, yo, that's you know what I mean? So it can be a difference. So we have to continue to break those cycles. We have to continue to normalize and validate the feelings of other men in many cases as much as we can.
Yep, and I'll just add to that as well though too, and I'm glad you said that though too, and then challenging them as well in these spaces as well. Like, yo, like when's the last time you told a male that you loved them, right? I'm like, yeah, like if I love mom, I love my brother, I love my dad, I love, you know, and it's not, it doesn't even have to be like a you know, family figure as well. Like I tell the guys, like, yeah, I love them, like, you know, and like even like in a brotherly, you know, way as well. That's what I mean. It's like, yo, like, you know, if something was to happen to me, it would hurt me. Even though like when I hear about a shooting or anything like that, I'm like, damn, yo, because it really hurts though as well. Like no one wants to, you know, wake up or you know, get that little citizen app on the phone and you hear like this, there was a shooting this place and that one. I'm like, damn. And then you see it like, oh, it's a 21-year-old, it's a 22-year-old. I'm like, I feel bad. I don't even know who it is at the moment, but I'm like, someone got shot, someone lost their life. It hurts me as well though too. So yeah, just, you know, just being able to talk about those things though as well though too, and let them know it's like, yeah, it's not weakness though. It's better to talk about things rather than, like you said, bottling it up. So yeah.
Can you walk us through what it means to feel your feelings? I think that's very powerful for young men and our you know, our all men really, and our young boys to, what does that mean? Feel your feelings.
Yeah. So I'm not sure if people are familiar with my movement, but I got a movement called Men to Heal. You can find out more information on my website, men2heal.com. Also got a YouTube channel, Men to Heal. But pretty much that came from, Feel Your Feelings came from watching the lack of attentiveness to men's overall wellness, not only from society, but from men itself, you know, just in relationship to other men, in relationship to developing young boys, young males and stuff like that. And we have to, you know, if you just sit back and observe like men, the gentlemanship, the you know, just certain things, you'll see that certain mannerisms are there catered to just being a beast and not showing that sensitive side or that affection to being something different, you know. So it's a challenge for most men to do that without being chastised or demonized and stuff like that. So for me, when I say feel your feelings, I say it in session, or I say it when I'm doing community engagement, or when I'm doing speaking platforms and stuff like that. And you start to see the reaction on different men's faces, like, oh man, as if they was pondering a part of their life when they could have been a little bit more expressive or experienced or felt a little bit more of that feeling. So again, we're talking about happiness and joy and stuff like that. Like if you was in a situation like right now, you probably go to the beauty shop every couple of weeks, depending on COVID situation. You guys are laughing, you talking about, you know, everything. But if you go to the barber shop, you know, people are just chilling in the chairs, or they're talking about sports, or they're talking about probably women, but it's no actual connection beyond that. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Or if you just, even if you look at the movies, you know, Hollywood has painted this picture like you see men interacting with each other. It has to be a level of competition, a level of, that competitive spirit, that spirit of let me one up you, opposed to, nah, bro, you got it, or just that of support. All right, cool, Jamal's doing this and I'm happy for you, bro, and hugging and, just interacting. It has to be an awkward moment. Like, even if you look on the movies, you'll see them want to hug and they start fumbling around and just shake hands. Like those things are like, no, feel your feelings, express it. You're a human. So
Exactly.
it's pretty much me just putting them back in a position of observing that you're human. You have feelings as well outside of just the basic negative ones: anger, sadness, grief, annoyance, and all those negative feelings. So feel all of them: the happiness, the joy, the zest, the abundance of life. Like, all of those things are important. So when I say that, to remind them, I can see their wheels turning. Like, oh man, I could have did this for my son or my daughter, or what, my teammate was going through it. I should have held him. I should have. So those things, I want those responses to be elicited when I say that. Similar to what you did, but you're a woman. It gravitates to you like, dang, what is it? So imagine a room full of men at a conference, like, oh man, you know what? I need to feel my feelings. I need to feel all my feelings. So that's what it is.
So absorbing the moment.
The moment, or it could have been a moment that expired and you're reflecting on what you could have done differently. Like just it's some young boy right now that probably went home and say, Dad, I don't want to play football. I want to learn how to bake. You know what I mean? And he's gonna get chastised because of what you don't want to play football, you want to bake. That ain't and you're gonna go back and forth. But if you feel your feelings within that, you gotta accept it. You shouldn't want him to do something that he don't want to do, and two, you're probably wanting him to relive your glory days. But if he want to do something differently, then allow him to do something differently. Have a discussion about it. Oftentimes, it's just pushed away. Like, nah, it's back and forth, or is it just a contangled action? Now this young man feels like, I'm not understood, I'm not wanted, I'm not validated, and those cycles tend to repeat. And now he's probably gonna stick with football because you wanted him to, but not have joy and pleasure in it because it ain't something that he wanted to do. So just all those things, I want people to be able to feel their feelings and not just the immediate time frame, but just reflect on the situation to where you could have handled it differently if you would have had more feelings than just the immediate anger or sadness or the ones that society wants you to do.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that as well. Like, definitely, just even like embracing, because a lot of times, I think, in my opinion, James, like a lot of times as well, though, too, when we talk about like your feelings, a lot of times it's more about like negative things that happen or something that transpire, and a lot of times it's never those positive, those wins. Like yeah, like when I'm in my sessions as well, though, too, it's like, what does that feeling of joy was like? What was that happiness like? I really want to poke and really get you to express and like really dig deep and explore that. Not always like what was that anger as well, though, too, because a lot of times that's easy to talk about. Like, yeah, I was angry because this and that, but also just continue and exploring. Like, so what really made you angry? Or like, even just using that example, you're talking about like, I'm playing football because like my dad really wants me to play football, or it's just I'm pressured into it though, really, because like, let's say I'm 6 feet and I'm like 14 years old and I'm like big, so I'm playing it, but I want to bake. I'm like, who knows? I could be the best baker ever. That's what I'm not even given that opportunity because society's telling me like, yo, like baking, like that's not what you should be doing, all that. So just changing those norms as well, though, too, changing that narrative basically around like what a man can and what they can't so-called do then as well, though, too. And a lot of times that starts as a child in the home as well, though, too. So that's just something that really makes me think about it, because let's say you're in a household and they're telling you, yeah, you have to do this. This is the way, those negative messages that they're receiving as a youth, then it's going to continue to grow, and as they grow, it's going to continue to go on with them. And that's how they like may carry themselves. Just we talk about like them being a football player, we're talking about like how conflict is handled, how they talk about things though. If you're mad about something, all right, tell me, why you're mad, rather than like, going in your room and slamming the door, and I'm never talking to nobody about it. And then you go outside and then you taking all that anger out on somebody else or something like that as well, though too.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's just something that I just see within the work.
That's good. Let's discuss the treatment for anxiety and for PTSD.
So it all depends, to be honest with you. So a lot of people don't know if there is a cure or a exact treatment for specific traumas. It's an ongoing thing. And again, people have different resiliency levels. So a treatment that may work for somebody may not work for somebody else. But in the sense of it, in the grand scheme of things, the specific treatment that I tend to do within my sessions is, of course, psychotherapy, which is pretty much just talk therapy and stuff like that, getting to the root cause of the trauma, trying to figure out, peeling back those layers, uncovering what took place, how it's affecting you, how can we prevent and identify certain triggers and stuff like that. And of course, with that is pretty much CBT, which is cognitive behavior therapy. That's something that I do a lot. And I also use reality therapy too, because like my man, pretty much most of my clientele is from the urban areas, so that reality therapy is impact that they can live with. We're talking about the here and now. We're talking about, they probably seen somebody go to jail. They probably seen somebody get robbed or, somebody heard a shooting or something like that. So reality therapy is pretty much one of my go-tos in conjunction with CBT. But of course, you got EMDR, which is something that's popular now for trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been known to do wonders. Some people even try hypnosis. Of course, you got the mindfulness and meditation, which is beneficial. Trauma sensitive yoga, just being trauma informed overall. Some people even use medications if it needs to, But me, I'm more of a holistic approach person, so I'd much rather do everything I can on my end before I even introduce somebody to medications.
Yep, facts. I just agree with that as well, though, too. That same holistic approach, though, and like I said, focusing on that here and now, really, though, because a lot of times they're dealing with these things, but also a lot of times we're like, I don't know exactly where I'm be sleeping tonight, type of thing. And I'm like, yeah, like I want to be able to, I can help you in regards to that, and then we can get to all these other things as well, though, too. We want the most pressing needs right now as well, though. And like I said, that talk therapy and also just letting folks know, though, as well, when we even think about therapy, we always think about like you're coming into the space or with the four walls, all white walls, you sitting down, you laying down or whatever it is on the couch or stuff like that. I'm like, yeah, therapy can take place any place. I'm like, whether it's on the phone, whether we walking in the park, whether we walking around, though, as well. And it's like changing that narrative around like what the when we think of therapy as well, though. I mean, like, yeah, like we understand like that community approach. I'm like, yeah, I could be in a Crown Fried Chicken and they got a bench and we spending this hour chopping it up, we talking around, we walking and stuff like that as well, though, too. So just add into that as well, like the whole approaches of CBT, trauma focus, CBT, all that stuff, though, as well. Like, breathing, exercise, that mindfulness, all that. Just stay. We want to focus on here and now, but also you see it really depends on the person and the individual, and like you said, like their resilience as well. And like I said, all of them have some type of resilience, and you just want to uplift it and build it up as well. Once they see that and they can acknowledge that, that's when the real work can take place. Then basically, as well.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. What's a misconception before just this is our last question? Is a misconception about anxiety and PTSD?
Yeah, so again, I think in most cases, a lot of people are numb and desensitized that don't know that they actually have these things because it constantly reoccurs. So let's just take the year 2020, right? We've seen the COVID situation people had to adjust to. So a lot of people got, they started to adapt and then something changed and then, more restrictions came and then stuff got lifted and then more restrictions came. So now you still in limbo. And then we also seen a lot of African American men being killed. Like, all right, cool. We're starting to grieve. Oh man, another one? What happened? He was jogging his neighborhood. Oh man, boom. What? Another one? He had a knee on his neck for 9 minutes. What? So it's no real process of recovery. So the misconception is it's gonna keep happening. So don't even worry about it. This is a part of my life. So a lot of people don't even seek help or don't even acknowledge the fact that they're dealing with stuff, or either acknowledge the fact that these things are not normal. You need to find a way to process these things. So those are the major misconceptions too. Just being numb and desensitized to it, like, oh, this is what it is.
Right.
Even watching the cases, watching people walk free, that's triggering in itself. That's playing on part of the anxiety in itself. Worrying about COVID, like, hey, am I going to be able to keep my job? Are they going to lay me off? Or am I going to work from home? Or, am I going to catch it if I go out? I can't see my loved ones if they sick. So all of that creates the anxiety to constantly happen, but you can't really address it. So you become numb. Like, it's going to happen. This is what's supposed to take place. So those things are misconceptions.
Sean?
Yeah, definitely add to that. I mean, like, that in the work that I'm doing, I'm working with, individuals who've been impacted by violence. So like, yeah, there has definitely been a lot of shootings that has been taking place, not just in New York, but, all over the place as well though too. And the whole point about anxiety, everybody deals with, has anxiety in some type of way or experiences anxiety. I mean, like, let's say like, oh, I'm coming on the show, like I'm anxious. I'm dealing with a little anxiety and stuff, but it's like how we deal with it as well though too. And just speaking of that, like COVID has exacerbated many mental health challenges. I mean, like, yeah, like especially when we talk about like, whether I'm be able to go to work, I'm gonna lose my job. But a lot of times, a lot of these folks don't even have jobs. A lot of them, like, yeah, they're in the streets every day, basically. And like, even like, I'm working with the guys that I work with, I'm like, a lot of times we talk about like safety and what the safety look like to them. And we talk about like, being safe in the streets, but also being safe because of COVID now. It's like the same way you try to be safe, just being out in the streets, you're seeing somebody, making sure that you're safe. You gotta take that same approach then to, to the pandemic as well. And like we talk about like not wearing masks, all that stuff as well though too. So yeah, how do you make sure that when we talk about like that PTSD and anxiety is like, how do you keep yourself safe? And like, what do you do then to, help you get through each day essentially though as well.
Right. Well, gentlemen, that is our time. But before we go, tell our listeners how they can connect with you. Starting with James.
Yeah, so I think the easiest way to connect with me is probably through my website, mentoheal.com, mentoheal.com. And from there, you can subscribe to my YouTube. You can follow me on the other platforms of social media. You also can order a copy of my book or some merch. So mentoheal.com is probably the easiest way. But of course, IG men_TO_HEAL, men_TO_HEAL, and YouTube is Men to Heal.
Thank you. Sean.
Yeah, so I would say the best way, our neighborsinaction.org website, and you can look at our Make It Happen page, and also you can always just reach out through email, which basically well, I don't know if we can put it in the chat, whatever, but my last name and then s@neighborsinaction.org, and we have our Make It Happen Instagram page. Basically, it's a Make It Happen NYC. So yeah, you could definitely check that out as well.
Thank you so much for allowing me to showcase your stories, your work, and for doing your part in changing the narrative. And lastly, for keeping your commitment by being part of the show. That means a lot. If you have enjoyed the show, please let us know. We would love to shout you out and post your comments. If you or someone you know is changing the narrative, please contact us at ichangethenarrative@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you. Meet us here next Saturday at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And we just thank you all for listening. Thank you, gentlemen, for being a part of the conversation. We hope to connect with you once again. And so